Gina Rinehart's tilt at Fairfax continues to reverberate throughout media and government circles. Treasurer Wayne Swan says the move is very bad for democracy. That's a quote. He fears the mining magnate will use her stake in the newspaper group to try and promote her commercial interests. And he's unhappy that Gina Rinehart is yet to commit to signing the Fairfax Charter of Editorial Independence.
And we're concerned that what will happen in this process is that Charter of Independence will be lost. I certainly call on Ms Rinehart very quickly to explain to the Australian people what her intentions are and whether she will or won't support a Charter of Editorial Independence.
Treasurer Wayne Swan in Question Time yesterday, but it's all talk really, because when push comes to shove, the government is rejecting a push by the Greens for urgent legislation to force media boards and directors to commit to editorial independence. The Greens leader, Christine Milne, is in our Parliament House studio. Senator Milne, good morning.
Good morning, Fran.
You want legislation binding media proprietors to charters of independence. How would that work?
Well, we think it's really important that we have a diverse and independent media in Australia, and it's very clear that what is happening now is that we could end up with all of Australia's newspapers, with the exception of the West Australian, in the hands of two proprietors with extremely right-wing views as well. So what we're saying is it's really important that journalists shouldn't be forced to adopt the editorial line of their proprietors, and that's why you need to guarantee independence. So we're saying that it shouldn't just be for Fairfax, of course. This should apply to everyone. And so we would say that you would develop a charter of editorial independence, and that directors of publicly listed companies would be expected to sign that charter, and it would be regulated in the same way as other responsibilities for directors are, and that would be currently through ASIC. But of course we're open to negotiations with the government and the coalition if we moved to a new regulator, as the Convergence Review required or suggests. We might be able to transfer that to that new regulator, or indeed any other proposal that we'd be open to. So this is not black and white, but what we're saying is it's not enough just to wring our hands now and say, oh dear, this is terrible. We actually need to do something about it.
What are we wringing our hands over, though? You say it's not black and white. Well, that's for sure, and which would make regulation tricky, I think, because how does signing a charter or committing to a charter guarantee that board members or proprietors, never interfere, given the job of the board is to guide any company to commercial success? It's a fine line, isn't it?
Yes, but we've got a different situation that has emerged. We're in the middle of an internet revolution which has changed media inevitably, and the result is that we have had this Convergence Review saying, look, we need to have another look at what constitutes the owner of a media outlet, if you like, and the Convergence Review has actually come up and said that there is a really strong argument for continued government intervention, particularly in media ownership. The Convergence Review has said a concentration of services in the hands of a small number of operators can hinder the free flow of news and debate in a democratic society, and therefore media ownership and control rules are vital to ensure a diversity of news and commentary is maintained. And that's where the Greens are coming from.
But in terms of diversity, I guess you could argue that Gina Rinehart is a new voice and a new hand in this. It's a new element to the ownership. It's adding more diversity, not less.
Well, actually, it's adding much less diversity, but it's taking away the diversity that's we already have. And I say that because one of the consequences of the mining boom is that we've had a concentration of economic power leading to a concentration of political power in the hands of one particular sector, and that's the mining interests. But in particular, Gina Rinehart has said in rallies and so on around the country and previously that this would be about her broader economic interests. And so we had Lord Monckton here in Australia as her guest, and she would be certainly, there's no doubt that there would be influence on journalists not to be able to write what they want to write on a range of issues relating to the Australian economy and certainly in relation to climate change.
Okay, so the Treasurer, Wayne Swan, he's in no doubt that Gina Rinehart is after Fairfax for one reason only, to influence the coverage of issues relevant to her business interests, which is basically what you're saying. If Gina Rinehart wasn't a rich miner, would you care about her involvement?
Yes, I would, because we had put some time ago Senator Bob Brown's submission to the Convergence Review, to the Finkelstein inquiry, was to say we need to protect the diversity of media ownership. We have raised the issue of concentration of ownership many, many times, because putting the media in the hands of a small number of people is a real threat to democracy. And we're also saying editorial independence is essential. So we believe that those two principles need to be upheld regardless of who is trying to buy into the media. The fact that you could have all of Australia's newspapers, with the exception of the West, controlled by two voices from the far right is a consequence of our failure to really look at this issue of concentration of media ownership, and it's urgent.
So is it the political leanings of these people you're concerned about? You describe Rupert Murdoch and Gina Rinehart and their opinions of being of the far right. Kerry Stokes is in there. Are you worried about his views? I noticed... Well, let's talk about an obvious potential conflict in this for you. The What If founder Graham Wood funded the Global Mail. He's a big backer of the Greens. Are you worried about his ownership?
Oh, we're worried about the concentration of ownership. So what we want to make sure is that the diversity of views that exist across the Australian society are actually represented throughout the various media enterprises, and that is why the Convergence Review came down and said we should be looking at content service enterprises to reflect the fact that the media now have all kinds of different ways of presenting the message. And so they're saying we need to make sure that we look at this issue, but they don't go far enough in our view. We want to maintain the cross-media ownership strength and actually strengthen it, because what we're fearing is that if you go down the path of just such a small concentration, then you undermine the expression of the diversity of views, and that is essential to a democratic society. If we don't have that, then we lose something really central to what makes this country such a good place to live, and that is an ability to express your views right across the board.
So it's pretty clear that in the current media environment, newspapers, particularly, but media companies, need support from Australian business people, wealthy Australians, because that's how they exist, that's how they survive. So those people will need to buy companies, and I think just people are unclear about why, Kerry Packer could own media companies, Conrad Black could own Fairfax, Kerry Stokes, as I say, owns media interests, Rupert Murdoch, but Gina Rinehart is so different to that, is such a concern. Is it because, you're saying, of her stated intention to have an influence over the views in the paper? That's your concern?
Well, I think the concern has been there for some time, which is why we have been saying that we need to address this increasing concentration of media ownership in Australia. But where it's now becoming an even greater concern is that you've got other commercial interests in a whole stable of corporate enterprises that one person might own. They're using the media outlet, the editorial content, to effectively promote or defend or stop criticism of other commercial interests. And so this actually goes to a competition issue if you want to look at it in that sense. And that's where it's of great concern. That was brought up in the UK in the Leveson inquiry about the Murdoch enterprises now being so broad. But in fact, when you get mining magnates buying newspapers, you will see a pressure to stop any kind of discussion or dissent about that industry or those interests. And so it's that matter that makes this of great concern. But it goes to the issue of, it's not who is buying the newspaper, it's whether there is a diversity of ownership, so you get that right across the board, and secondly, whether you've got editorial independence so that the owners can't tell the journalists what they can and can't write, who they can and can't criticise. That's the key thing. In a democracy, freedom of speech is guaranteed when you get diversity of media ownership and you get editorial independence, and that's where the Greens are coming from.
So to cut to the chase, this is particularly of concern to you because because of the key current policy debates in this country, if Gina Rinehart is granted seats on the Fairfax board and she doesn't agree to abide by the Charter of Editorial Independence, you're concerned that Fairfax newspapers will start campaigning against the mining tax and the carbon tax?
Oh, well, I'm concerned that they won't represent the diversity of views and you won't get fair reporting across the board. And climate change would, of course, be one issue that I'm concerned about. But the overriding point is that you want a diversity of views represented. And my concern is a concentration of media ownership in Australia and a lack of editorial independence would mean you wouldn't get that diversity of views. And I think that is why I think Fairfax board were inundated with over 10,000 emails, I understand, from the community saying, hey, we want editorial independence. We don't want to be waking up and looking at the Fairfax papers just being a mouthpiece for the owner. And that certainly is a concern for the Greens, because what does it say about where the journalists will end up in the long term? And also it actually undermines, apart from anything else, the shareholder value of Fairfax, because its greatest value, if you like, to the community is the fact that it is seen as a high-quality media outlet, that it is unbiased.
Okay, Senator Milne, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Christine Milne is the leader of the Greens. It's 16 minutes to 8 on Breakfast.